Good afternoon. My name is Dyke Hendrickson, and I am the host of Life Along the Merrimack. This is a podcast during which time we talk about the history and the health of the Merrimack River. Today we have a very knowledgeable guest, Christina Eckert, who is co-director of the Merrimack River Watershed Council. Christina, thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You know, when I think about the Watershed Council, and I'm a former newspaper guy, I think there was a lot of attention recently to a kayak trip down the Merrimack, about 117 miles. I loved reading about it. I loved seeing local state rep Jim Kelcourse in a kayak, and I understand he did quite well. But can you talk a little about the trip itself and what you folks were trying to put forth, because the Watershed Council was quite involved in that?
Yes, it started with a group of friends who, Lane Glenn, who is the president of Northern Essex Community College, and Dugan Sherwood, who is the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Haverhill, and Derek Mitchell, who is the head of the Lawrence Partnership. And they formed a group that was just going to do this for fun. They brought in Dan Grauvac, who's on the board of the Merrimack River Watershed Council. And then they sort of agreed to let us make this an opportunity for the Watershed Council to get some publicity about our mission, and also to bring in other stakeholders who could actually help with river problems. So James Kelcourse came, Christina Minicucci, who's the rep from North Andover, and Diana DiZoglio, who's the state senator, came on the trip from the very beginning. They did, and Heather McMahon, who's the executive director of Groundwork Lawrence, was there from the beginning.
And I'm thinking this didn't happen in one day. I mean, 117 miles in a day would be quite remarkable. Was this over 3 or 4 days?
It was a 4-day trip. It started on a Wednesday and up in above Concord, New Hampshire, and went all the way to Saturday, I think it was the 10th of August, ended at Plum Island.
I'm just thinking, were there locks and areas that you had to portage and walk around a little bit?
Yes, there were definitely some portage areas. I wasn't on this one, but they had to carry the kayaks for about half a mile to get around a dam there. And this is on the Upper Merrimack above Manchester, New Hampshire.
Well, above Manchester is a busy place. Also, Lowell, Massachusetts, as you know, at one time had many locks, many dams, and of course they harnessed the hydropower to create, many of the successful textile mills at the time. But when we talk about the Watershed Council, can you explain, what it is and what the goals are of it?
Well, the Merrimack River Watershed Council was started in 1976 to address issues of water pollution in the Merrimack. At the time, the factories were dumping chemicals into the river as a matter of course. It was just seen that was the way you handled it. And the Clean Water Act was passed, and attempt was made to clean up. A successful attempt was made to clean up the river, to take the chemicals out, to force the factories to, send that into sewage systems and not into the river. So the river is a lot cleaner than it was in the 70s now. A lot of good has been done. But in the past few years, we've noticed an increase in another problem, which we call combined sewage overflows, or CSOs. And what happens is the wastewater treatment plants that have been built along the river, which were built to strain any pollutants out of the water that goes into the river, get overwhelmed when there's a heavy rain. And they have no choice but to release the water into the river. The other choice would be to back up into people's houses or into the streets. And so at that time, sewage overflows go into the river. It's been going on for a long time, but in 2018, that kind of spiked. We had a large number of combined sewage overflows, about 800 million gallons over the course of the year.
Well, as I understand, climate change is having quite a bit to do with what you're talking about. We're getting a lot of rain in short bursts, which tends to overwhelm the sewage treatment plants. And I would mention, I went to one of the organization meetings of the Merrimack River Commission, and some of the managers of the sewage treatment plants were actually there. And they were trying not to be too defensive, but they want to cooperate, and they're just saying, we'd love to do a better job. Right now, we don't have the facilities. We would have to have the funding to take the rainwater and put it elsewhere. In other words, not run it through the sewage treatment plant, but run it through another facility or a lagoon or something. Do you hear that? Do you hear that this is an expensive proposition?
It's very expensive. There have been a number of possible solutions floated. All of them cost millions, if not billions of dollars. Manchester, for example, is separating their sewer from their stormwater drains. They have spent $58 million to do West Manchester. They're about to spend another $200 million to do East, and I think that only may cover half of East. So they're separating the stormwater from the sewage, which is the way new treatment plants are built these days. But New England is older, so a lot of ours are combined. That's why the word combined sewage overflows. Nashua had an interesting solution, which was to build a huge tank next to the water treatment plant, and when they know there's going to be a rain, they divert the sewage into the tank. The rainwater comes through, they process that. When they're done with that, they pull the water back out of the tank and process that. And that's been pretty successful. You don't always get an overflow from Nashua when there's a heavy rain because they plan ahead. But they were in a unique situation where they were able to build that. And again, it cost millions of dollars to build. You have to have the right circumstances, the right situation where you have an area near the plant where you can divert the water to. Lowell is looking into building a second plant side by side with the first one, which wouldn't be as detailed as the first one. It would be what they call a wet water treatment plant, where they could just do fewer processes to get rid of the pollutants. So there's a variety of different possibilities that are floated, but they're all expensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the early 1970s, Senator Ed Muskie from Maine, Senator Ted Kennedy here from Massachusetts, they were among those who pushed for the Clean Water Act, which was passed in about 1972. This was federal. There were many millions of dollars, and I think everybody who is around or has come along since then said that this federal legislation was very valuable, and as you said, in the 70s and 80s, the river got cleaner. We do have a different tenor of this administration in Washington. Is federal aid a possibility at this time, or should we be looking at our own resources to see what each community can do?
Well, I think with the numbers we're looking at, we need federal aid. And I do think it's a possibility. There is an infrastructure bill that is floating around Congress, which has money set aside for this if it passes.
I love that bill because every once in a while you hear about it and then it disappears because it has a lot for everybody and every state would benefit. But then it goes 2 months and nothing seems to happen.
Well, Congresswoman Trahan from Lowell and Congressman Moulton from this area have put a request, I believe it's part of that bill, for $500 million to address sewage treatment infrastructure. So if that passes, that will increase the different sewage treatment plants can apply for a government grant to address, however they choose to solve the CSO issue. Mm-hmm. And so they've pushed for that.
Well, I was actually happy in a way that Seth Moulton recently announced that his presidential campaign has come to a close because I thought, boy, now he has more time to spend on the North Shore. Now, I know he's been involved, and I know he put his name on the bill with Congresswoman Trahan, but I thought, geez, maybe he could get his good energy and his good connections with everybody and have him and work along with Lori Trahan on this and, just perhaps move the ball forward a little bit.
Yeah, and they've also both signed on to a sewage notification bill that's a federal one. We have several in the Massachusetts legislature, but Moulton and Trahan have sponsored a notification bill also in Congress, which we hope will pass.
Now, how would that work? We had here on the show a fellow from Rotary, and he is trying to raise money to have an app for online use. In other words, if two stations up the river did let go on, say, Sunday, by Monday morning, the app would be sending out notifications to boaters and clubs to say, there's a big CSO coming this way, just keep your eye on it. So that's one element. I think Mayor Donna Holliday here in Newburyport was thinking about flags. I haven't quite figured that out. Flag sounds a little 18th century to me, but nevertheless. Have you heard exactly how a notification might happen?
Well, the bills in the Massachusetts legislature very specifically set out how this can happen, and there are several of them. There's one that's making progress, sponsored by Linda Dean Campbell, which lets us as individuals sign up to be notified, so we can all, would probably be an email process. You can also check a website. There's numerous ways of notification on that bill. Diana DiZoglio also introduced a bill which would require notification at access points. So that would be where the flags come in. So you would be at a dock, say Cashman Landing here in Newburyport, and there would be a flag there that would tell you exactly what was going on. So those are two notification bills, local ones, that we're hoping that will pass this year.
Now, I'm Dyke Hendrickson, the host of Life Along the Merrimack. I'm with Christina Eckert, who is interim co-director of the Merrimack River Watershed Council. And one of our guests not too long ago talked about creating a taxing zone for, say, there were 16 communities in Massachusetts, that there would be, with agreement somehow, a tax. If there was more water one summer than the next, they would actually pay, not a tariff, but an excise tax of sorts, because they're benefiting from a cleaner environment. Have you heard much about a taxing district?
No, I haven't heard that at all. Yeah.
In Portland, I must say Portland, Maine, they call it the rain tax. And it was because they were having trouble in Casco Bay, and they marketed it like this. They said, look, we're getting more rain in quicker bursts. We're going to have to pay more for this. So if we have a really rainy summer, you're going to get a little extra on your water bill and your cleanup bill. But I haven't heard that introduced down here.
Well, when we had the kayak trip and we met with one of the stops was in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Fred McNeil, who's the chief engineer of their EPA program, met with us there. And he had an interesting suggestion. He said, we have a National Trust Fund for highways, but we don't have one for sewage infrastructure. And he suggested maybe a national bottle bill or something that would provide funding for a National Trust Fund for sewage infrastructure, so that instead of all of a sudden needing millions of dollars, all along we have a steady stream of income that we can use to upgrade facilities.
You know, one of the, that sounds beautiful, and since we're just blue skying solutions here, I know several years ago, and here in Massachusetts, there was a bill that would have a deposit on these small plastic bottles, the water bottles and whatever, and I think we all know they're all over the place. They're in the river, they're in the ocean, but the bill did not pass. Many years ago, 30 perhaps, the same thing happened with beer cans and soda cans. It did pass, 5 cents each, and we really did a good job of taking them off the streets and out of the water. I wonder if if you looked at the plastic situation and said, could we merge the two? Could we get plastic out of the water, get some deposit for this, and perhaps create a source of revenue?
Yeah, I do think that's something to look at.
So that's a possibility. And I know the Merrimack Valley River Commission is looking at a number of things. But one of the things that intrigues me, we talk about CSOs, but there was a story in one of the local papers, Eagle Tribune, I think, in Lawrence over the weekend, that talked about this fellow dredges the river and he pulls out tires and hypodermic needles and bicycles. So, I mean, it's a little unseemly to think about, I must say. But we have challenges in addition to the CSOs, because I've been in parts of the river, and sometimes you're just amazed that there is such rubbish.
Yeah, I've gone out with Rocky when he's done some of his cleanups. It's amazing what you'll find. And, it's on all of us to not throw things into the river. One would think you wouldn't have to tell people that, but apparently you do.
And Rocky, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his last name, but he has gone to many of the city councils and town councils and asked for money to fund his activities. And he is not part of government. He is, a citizen. He's kind of a truck driver and a backhoe operator type. Which is good because that enables him to put a backhoe into the river and get this stuff out. But I myself am hoping that, I live in Newburyport, I'm hoping that they could take him a little more seriously, give some money, and he's still trying to get those hypodermic needles out of the river.
Right. Rocky can deploy booms to collect these things, and then he'll go out and empty the booms sporadically and empty all those things out. And he's equipped for that. So it's just a matter of if a community wants to pay for him to put out a boom. I don't think he's charging a lot of money for that.
Right, and I have seen him proceed, and he has a very unique way of presenting before city councils, I must tell you that. There's a lawyer who works with him about 6 feet to his left, who sometimes holds up his hand. Rocky, I don't think we have to go there. I think we've given them enough information. But when we talk about the Watershed Council, now you occasionally look for members. If someone wanted to join the Watershed Council or be part of volunteer efforts, what would they do, Christina?
Well, we are a membership organization. We're completely supported by members. And on our website, which is www.merrimack.org, and that's Merrimack with a K on the end, we have a page where you can choose a membership, whether it's student, individual, family, or a higher level supporting or sustaining membership. And then you become a member for a year. You're on our email list, and you'll hear about all of our events. And we have cleanups that you can come help out with. And we're hoping to add some more recreational activities or educational recreational activities. We do have educational presentations that we give. We don't charge for them when we give them, so those are supported by membership. There was recently one of our presentations in Newburyport where it was standing room only. We had to turn people away. Mm-hmm. Where John McCone, my colleague, comes in and gives a presentation, whether it's on CSOs or whether it's on the history of the Merrimack. Right now he's working on an issue with shellfish die-off in the Merrimack. Mm-hmm. So he's developing, he's right now he's doing the research on it. So,
well, John McCone, for those of you who are on the North Shore, was the editor of the Newburyport Daily News. Had a great interest in the river. Has a boat himself and goes out frequently. And if you had to think, Christina, of a short-term goal for the Watershed Council as you start the fall, what would a short-term goal be for your council?
Well, I started a project this summer with water testing. We want to start a consistent water testing program. I had college interns helping me who have studied environmental science, and we put together a plan and did some preliminary testing here at Cashman's Landing and over in Amesbury at the Goodwin Marina. And I'd like to have a long-term, steady plan with citizen volunteers helping us that we can train and test the water regularly for bacteria, for stormwater pollutants, for there's a new issue with something called PFAS or PFAS. Have you heard about this?
I don't know that.
It's perfluoroalkyl substances, which are what they call forever chemicals. They don't break down, and they're considered carcinogens. And they're leaching into the river from industrial sites. There's a big one in Merrimack, New Hampshire.
Well, one of the things we have to remember also is about 600,000 people, many of them in the Lawrence area, get their water from the Merrimack River. Now, of course, there are numerous technologies and scientific elements that make it clean, but I think the back of everyone's mind, it would be nice if the river could become cleaner, because we have an awful lot of people drinking the water, and in recent years, particularly at this end of the river, the tourist industry has grown remarkably. We have 1,500 vessels pleasure vessels on the Newburyport side alone. Salisbury and Amesbury have about 500. So unlike 2 decades ago when a lot of kids were told don't go near the water, we have a lot of recreation here. So I would think that's another reason to clean up in the future.
Recreation is part of our mission to provide access to the river, and obviously you don't want people to access the river if it's not safe. So we want to make sure that it's safe for them and do everything we can to make that happen. And then it's circular. So if we make the river safe for recreation, the people who participate in that, the boaters and the fishermen and the swimmers, kayakers, will turn around and become wonderful stewards for the river and work to keep it clean. So everybody helps each other.
Well, I know that fishermen are very concerned. We've had a number of them on this program, Life Along the Merrimack. And they are concerned. They see sewage after the rains, but on some occasions they say, gee, there used to be more stripers here. There used to be just generally more fish. Now, a lot of that's anecdotal, but I know, as you say, there are many recreation people who are just saying, let's pull it together because we want to fish, we want to go boating, we want to swim if possible.
This is the reason that I wanted to do the water testing program, to find out what is in the water and how it is affecting wildlife in the water, like fish and shellfish and even plants. It's not just the sewage. There is something, contaminants that come from runoff, especially when you have impervious areas like parking lots along the river. So what happens with the heavy rain, the water will run off the parking lot and into the river, and it'll take with it all the pollutants that are sitting there, like phosphorus and nitrates, right. Ammonia, and those too can be very dangerous, possibly more dangerous than sewage for river wildlife. So we want to test for that. The wastewater treatment plants are being held accountable by the EPA to keep that out of the river, to keep these kind of chemicals out of the river. There's, like I said, this new interest in PFAS, which New Hampshire is ahead of us on, and that they're setting standards to keep that out of the water. And another thing to test for is our metals and ammonia, things like that. Because of the history of the river, in the bottom, in the sediment, there's a lot of things that have settled in there that are probably not good for us. And sometimes when it rains, that gets dredged up. It gets the water moves around a little, and some of this gets brought out into the water and probably dumped down here in Newburyport.
Well, historians will remember that about 2 centuries ago, 1821, the first big textile factories were built in Lowell. Then later, about 2 decades, they built an entire town with Lawrence. They built a town just so they could populate textile mills they were building there. And I have seen your presentation, the Watershed Council presentation, on some of the old days and some of the old pollution that was in the Merrimack River, and it's shocking. One day it would be orange because they happen, to have an orange tint to the cotton that day. Could be royal blue the next week. But I think one thing about the river, it's kind of resilient. I've heard scientists speak and they say, we've got problems with bacteria, but it's a fast-moving river, it's a resilient river. If you look back on the 19th century, that was a very damaging thing. And so I want to commend you and the council for having this presentation, that's where I saw it, about what the river used to look like and hopes of making it clean again. Will that presentation be made this fall here on the North Shore?
We make that presentation when anybody invites us to. So it's a matter of if someone wants to hear the presentation, we will come and make it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things in sports and in politics is the concept of momentum. And it seems to me that in the last 6 months or a year, there has been some momentum growing from local, state officials, from federal bureaucrats, from organizations like yours, that, let's all get together on this and move forward. Now, when I think of Ed Muskie and Ted Kennedy, they were able to get a momentum and they passed a significant bill. do you have to go a little farther? Do you have to develop a little more momentum until you get more political input? Or do you think you're just about there now?
Oh, no, we have to keep working at it. We do have local legislators like Jim Calcourse and Christina Minicucci and Diana DiZoglio who are putting bills forth in the local legislature. And then we need the federal money. So it's great to have Seth Moulton and Laurie Trahan fighting for us. But we've recently met with the New Hampshire delegation, all four of them, Chris Pappas, Annie Custer, Jean Shaheen, and who am I blanking? Who am I missing? We met with the two senators and the two reps to talk about supporting the bills. Annie Custer and Chris Pappas have signed on to the one asking for the $500 million. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we're asking Jean Shaheen to see if there can be a Senate version of that. And it requires, and then it needs a nationwide drive to supply the funding to address infrastructure issues having to do with the river. I don't think you can ever really let your foot off the gas. We have to continually push to keep things out of the river, because you can't say the river's resilient. The river's only so resilient.
Mm-hmm.
If you get to the point of no return, it's not going to come back, which is why the shellfish die-off worries us a little bit.
Well, one of the things about the Merrimack River, several years ago, I was with the Daily News, a reporter. I covered the waterfront, and they did open the clam beds down here for about 3 weeks down off of Plum Island. Now, I quickly point out that all clams pulled out of the waters from the Merrimack have to go to a state purification plant, which is in itself on Plum Island. So I wouldn't want anybody to think they were going to eat clams that haven't been purified. Now, farther down in different places, Essex and Ipswich, they don't have to do that, but they certainly have to clean their clams up here. So that's another of your goals, I would think, when we can get to a place where you can catch the fish and eat them, when you can have clams and eat them. That is a goal.
Right. When the water's clean for all forms of life.
Well, you've been a writer before, and just maybe you could talk a little about how you segued from writing. I think you were involved, or you earned a degree in UCLA in script writing and creative writing. I believe you were involved in some work on The Commish, which was, a very popular show here starring a North Andover actor. Can you talk a little about how you got into writing? And finally, in that 2 minutes we have, what kind of ending would you put here to the Watershed Council work?
Well, I was a television writer before children. Then I was a full-time mom, and I got back into work by working for a small nonprofit in Boxford called Community Giving Tree. And I used my writing skills there to start writing grants for Community Giving Tree and doing a lot of fundraising. So when I got involved with Merrimack River Watershed Council, it was natural for me to write grants. And I've also been writing the appeal letters and thank you letters. Writing is a skill that can help across a lot of different subjects. But, my goal I don't want Merrimack River Watershed Council to end. My goal is for us to continue to study the river, educate about the river, advocate for the river, which all will lead to recreating and enjoying the river. And so that's the goal, and that goal will continue, for years to come.
Are there any events coming up this fall that you would mention, maybe a cleanup, or maybe, I think you are having a membership drive right now.
We are in a membership drive. People can go to www.merrimack.org to become members. And we are having a cleanup in Haverhill on September 15th at Buttonwoods area of Haverhill. And we are joining with Groundwork Lawrence for their Spigot River cleanup on September 21st.
Well, I was over in Lawrence recently and went through the archives. And Lawrence is one of the leaders in the country of taking impure water, discerning what the problems were, and making it potable so people could actually drink it. It was a national leader. I mean, you can see why, but so this area has a lot of history. It has a lot going for it. Most of us live near the river and the ocean because we love this area, and so I applaud you for your good work, and I have been talking with Christina Eckert of the Watershed Council. Could you just repeat when that cleanup is in Haverhill so people...
Haverhill is Sunday, September 15th, and then we have the Spigot River cleanup in Lawrence on Saturday, September 21st.
Great. Well, Christina, thank you very much for being here. This is Life Along the Merrimack. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. We will be back at this time next week talking about the history and health of the Merrimack River. Thank you very much.